Hi, this is Roger, thanks for dropping by. Why are we in the kitchen today? I'll tell you why we're in the kitchen today. First and foremost, let's get on to what this video is all about. Phalaenopsis orchids, the most common house plant there is nowadays in most countries, not all. So, 3 things you need to know about these mass-produced Phalaenopsis orchids. 1, where they come from. That becomes important as we go into number 2, why do they die? Which leads into number 3, how to look after them and keep them going long term. So that's what we're up to. Cheers. Now, why are we in the kitchen? Get back to that. It was raining when I got up. It's now late enough in the day that I'm thinking about settling down for my evening meal. It'll be dark in the not too distant future. And it's still raining. The gutters are all full, it's dripping all over the plastic roof, the noise is incredible. I sat down to watch the news on the TV and I can't hear the TV because of the noise. So I've come out in the kitchen to get away from it. That's why we're in the kitchen. Cheers. Right, first of all let me move the camera. I've got some Phalaenopsis. I grow these on my kitchen windowsill, so it's appropriate we're in the kitchen. I've got some to have a quick look at. So we'll drop the camera down, wait for it to adjust to the light. Somewhere like that. This isn't zoomed in, no it's not. Right, what I've got here is some samples from a little species to what I would call a giant, to one with mottled leaves, to one that's actually in bloom. Not that you can see the blooms there, you will in a minute. So this is the type of variety you can get, and they do come in quite compact sizes. Yeah, I mean if you look at the size of my hand, this is a compact plant. This is also a species, this is equestris. So these are not so easy to look after. You're unlikely to come across this in your local supermarket or garden centre or garage or whatever, where the mass-produced ones are, because it's a species. So we'll put that one to one side. That's a little one. But just as a comparison, if I can get them both in the same shot, yeah? They're both Phalaenopsis. This is the biggest one I've got, and you can see now from my hand just the sheer size of the leaves. They can grow very big. So that is a giant. We'll get that to one side. And then on occasions you can find them with mottled leaves, and if you can find these, they are very attractive because these are nice looking plants even when they're not in bloom. Right, I'll take that one out of the pot just so that we can have a look at this. This is what they're supposed to look like in the pot. Lovely big thick fleshy roots. Sometimes the roots will hang over the side of the pot, sometimes they grow out the bottom of the pot. That's how they grow. And under normal circumstances, these are epiphytes, they grow on trees in the wild, and they would be growing at a slight angle. We tend to try and grow them upright in the pots because it saves space. But in the wild they would be growing on a branch or in the fork of a tree, or sometimes even upright on the trunk. And they like to lean over slightly, and the main reason is that when it rains, the rain runs out through the bottom of the leaves and doesn't collect in the crown or anything. But less important in the wild, they've always got good airflow and everything. So then we come back to the last one, which is in flower. Now this is not necessarily a typical flower spike. Let me explain why. It's branched, not, oh hang on, I'm going to have to move the camera. This spike is so tall. I'll just raise the camera up so that we can see what we're talking about. There, that's better. Right, this is a branch spike, and each branch has a set of blooms on, and there are also blooms towards the end of the spike. So that is not a typical spike. The typical spikes are not normally branched, but they can be. So a typical bloom then, they have a look about them. Despite their sizes, they have a look about them. They have a shape and a style that most people would recognise as an orchid because they are so frequently seen wherever you go. Wherever there are plants for sale and there are some orchids included, there will be some of these. Now, why are they so common? The reason is that it was seen that these particular orchids, let me turn the camera around again, there's a lot of moving the camera about today, isn't there? There, right, let's get back to, wait for the camera to adjust for the light, because the light's strange in here because it's behind me and above. Right, it was realised that these orchids could be grown fast and forced to bloom at a very early stage in their life. And it could be done on a mass production scale, and the product coming out the far end could be very cheap. So they became mass produced. Now these are done in the hundreds of thousands, in huge big greenhouses like the size of football fields. They're enormous, you can't see the other end. And basically they are force grown in conditions that you would have a job to recreate, and you certainly won't create those conditions in your home, which is where you've bought your orchid to take. So where do they come from then? They come from an environment that is perfect for their growth initially. And they grow very fast, they're fed heavily, they get the perfect lighting for the right number of hours of the day at the right temperature during the day, which is 27-28 degrees. Not many people have got that in their home, because if it was that warm in the house you'd probably go outside where it was cooler. Yeah, so that's the temperature they are grown at, 27-28 degrees, with some humidity, with some airflow, and fed heavily to grow fast. The nighttime temperature drops down a bit, but not too much while they're being grown, and they grow very fast. When they get to the size where they're capable of blooming, they drop that daytime temperature down. Yeah, they drop it down by 4 or 5 degrees, down towards the 21-22 degrees mark. Some go even cooler than that. Yeah? And consequently the nighttime temperature drops down, but they don't drop the night below 18-19 degrees C, because they shouldn't go any cooler than that. They are tropical orchids after all. That drop induces spikes, and because of the trade secrets with their feed, they tend to get very large floriferous spikes. The spikes are pushed on, staked, ready to go to market as the blooms start to open, so that they arrive ready for sale in bloom. And that can be done in less than 2 years. You can't, they can. So that's where they come from. They then go to an auction, so they've left their lovely environment and straight away they've gone in a truck, they've gone to an auction, different environment again. Then they'll go in another truck and possibly to a warehouse or possibly into a container, you know, to go on a ship to go to another country. Then they get to another country, then another truck, and then off to somewhere else, and eventually they get to where you find them. They are under extreme stress at that point, but that point might not be far away from when they left their nice comfy environment. Yeah, that comfy environment might have only been 4 or 5 days earlier. Nonetheless, the plant is almost in a state of shock. It doesn't know what on earth is going on because it's left its comfort zone and been subjected to all sorts of stress and trauma. So it's not in a happy place when you get it. And then you take it home into your home environment, which is not going to be like where it came from. It's going to be different. In addition to that, the mass producers do not want to spend money on good quality media. So they are normally grown in sphagnum moss plugs. They are then potted on into a coir type fibrous media, and that's where they stay. That's how they arrive with you. Now, in their 28 degrees centigrade with the correct day lengths and some fans on and all those right conditions, that media is great. They can chuck water and feed on it and the plant will be healthy. When you get it home, the chances are that media, when you water your plant, is going to stay wet for a very, very long time. And that's the last thing that Phalaenopsis orchids want. So there we get on to point number 2, why do they die? They often die because of the stress in the change of environment from where they were grown to where you're now keeping them, and all the transport changes and everything that have gone on. In addition to that, they're in a media that has already had its life. Yeah, it's finished. It needs to be changed. Most people don't know that, so they leave it in the media it's in. Think of it as a house plant and give it a trickle of water every day and it stays wet and the roots will rot. Without the temperature and the airflow and the right day length and everything, the right light intensity, it won't be growing as well as it should. And if it's not growing as well as it should, it's not going to use the water up in the pot, so the roots will rot. And therein lies the main reason why Phalaenopsis orchids die. They've been drowned. Yeah? In their natural environment, they're hanging on a tree or on a branch or in the fork of a tree. Any water that comes down just runs off. And then there's some airflow, some air movement, dries them off. So in between the rain showers, which in the tropical rainforests in the monsoon type periods is every day, they dry in between. They're not wet. And that's what those roots need. They're big fleshy roots. They need to be soaking wet, absorb the moisture, then they need to dry. You often get them in a black pot or a terracotta coloured pot and you can't see the media. You can't see whether it's still soaking wet from the last time you watered it. So that's the main reason they die. It's what's below ground, it's what's in the pot is killing them. And what they arrive in is probably not suitable for the environment you're going to keep them in, whereas it was fine where they once were. So, how do we keep them alive longer term then? The main thing to do, first of all, you will read in places, particularly in older books you might get from the library or from your Orchid Society library. They're out of date in the current view of the way orchids should be grown, but they will say that your orchid needs to be watered every week, and when they come to feeding they say feed weekly. Well, you have to bear in mind, if your orchid's going to dry in between waterings and it isn't dry after a week, that advice is about as useless as you can get, because pouring water in on top of a wet, soggy media is just going to kill the plant. Yeah. So what do we need to do? Really, irrespective of whether it's in flower or not, except if there are quite a lot of buds on the spike, in which case let those buds open. Once the buds are open, you can repot that plant without losing the blooms under most circumstances. Yeah? So you need to get the plant out of that media, which means repotting it. Now, first thing is you'll need to get some suitable media. And quite honestly, where is it? There. It's the easiest one to show you. This is the sort of thing that in most home environments the plant will do well in. It's bark chips. Now these are not the bark chips you buy to mulch your garden with. These are specifically designed to grow orchids in. You can get this type of bark online. If you go to an orchid nursery, they will sell you some. They're not going to give it away, are they? But yes, chunky bark, or bark of different grades even, but bark is a good media for Phalaenopsis orchids in a home environment because there's a lot of air in there, and when you pour a litre of water in your pot, almost a litre will come out the bottom, but you will have soaked the roots, they're wet. Another thing to remember with Phalaenopsis orchids, let's get one out again. If you look at the colour of the roots, they have a silvery grey look. Yeah? They're that colour when they're dry. When they're wet, they go green. So the orchid tells you when it's getting a bit dry and could do with some water, because the roots change colour. How do you know that? Because you've put it in a clear pot and you can see what's going on. Unfortunately, where you're going to keep this with some reasonable light, you will get algae inside the pot. Yeah, because of the moisture and the light. So put the pot in the dark for the majority of its time, with the ability to take it out and have a look at your roots. You can look at the media, because it's in a pot you can see through. You can see whether the media is dry or wet. So you don't tend to water too often, you water just the right frequency. How often is that, I hear you ask? How often is that? I'm not going to tell you, because there is no definitive answer. You water them when they're either almost dry or shortly after they are dry. That could take a couple of days, it could take a week. In winter, it could take a fortnight. Don't water them until they need the water. And if you do all that, the chances are you'll keep a healthy plant. I've been asked many times, how long do orchids live? Technically, forever. I've seen a Phalaenopsis that was 40 years old. It had a stem nearly a metre long with roots coming out of it and 4 leaves on the end and a flower spike. It just grew and grew and grew and grew. That's a rarity. Keeping them going that long is unusual. And quite honestly, when they start getting old and they start moving away from the pot and they've got a bare stem and they start to look unsightly, that may be a time to actually say, we need a new one. So there we go, there's your 3 points. Where they come from determines the environment they're used to and how they are grown well. Why they die is that change of environment and the conditions that you put them in, and keeping the roots wet in a media that's old and tired, possibly with already rotting roots inside it, and doing nothing about it. Main reason. Okay, and then how to keep them longer term. Get them in some sensible media in a clear pot so that you can see what's going on, and take great care with your watering, because it's too much water what kills most orchids. The only other thing you need to consider is the light it likes. These are not bright light orchids. A north facing windowsill is good as long as it hasn't got a radiator underneath it. They like to be warm. If you can keep them above 18 degrees at night and daytime at least 4 or 5 degrees warmer, they'll do okay. If you can keep them during the day above 25 and below 30 degrees, they'll do very well, thank you very much, because that's closer to the environment they were used to and what they would get in the wild. So they will also need some feed. Any orchid fertiliser that you can get off the shelf will do. Just follow the instructions, that will be fine. It's not a panic, it's not a worry, but they will need some food, like all other plants. but orchids are not high feeders compared with your apple tree and your rose bush in the garden, so they don't need that sort of strength feed. So get an orchid, a fertiliser that says it's for orchids, and follow the instructions and you'll do fine. How often do you feed? I would recommend 3 out of 4 waterings when the plants are more likely to be growing, which is in the summer season in the UK, and perhaps 1 feed in 2 or even 3 during the winter time when they will have slowed down. Why have they slowed down in the winter? I've got the heating on. It's the day length. Your standard day length in the UK and other similar type latitude or longitude countries is too short in the winter for active growth, so they tend to just slow down. Some of them just stop growing. They just sit there waiting for the longer days to come. Your kitchen light or your light in the lounge will do nothing. There is nowhere near sufficient light for that type of lighting to do any good for the plant, unless you put the plant so close to it the heat from the bulb will burn the leaves. So don't think that's doing any good because you've got them in the lounge and you're sitting there in the evening with the light on. Nowhere near enough light. Doesn't compare to the old currant button in the sky, does it? So there we go, a flash round Phalaenopsis orchids. Now on the end of this video I will put a link to a playlist which is called Store-Bought Orchids, and it's the story of a couple of Phalaenopsis that I went to a garden centre, spotted some pretty blooms, brought them home, and it's their life story of what happened to them. I took a look at them, we eventually repotted them, and it follows them through. A whole set of videos in a playlist geared up purely to store-bought, mass-produced Phalaenopsis orchids. And I'll include the first one of those videos as a separate link. So you can watch the first one, and if you fancy the idea, you can watch the playlist. Now you're not going to watch a whole playlist in one go. You can always watch a bit and come back to it. So there we go. A summary of Phalaenopsis orchids and the 3 main points that I think you need to know. There's lots of other information you could get, but those 3 things will help you get one of these mass-produced orchids home and still have it going for you and bring it back into flower after a while yourself. You can take a lot of pride and you'll get a lot of satisfaction when you see a nice new flower spike coming out, growing on, forming buds and opening up, and you can pat yourself on the back and tell your friends, I did that, I grew that one, I didn't go up the store and buy that, I grew that one myself. It's rewarding. See you next time, thanks for dropping by.